So, my wife and I went to see Top Gun Maverick recently. Really awesome movie. We loved it. Definitely a sequel done right. The score was composed by Hans Zimmer. Zimmer is, of course, one of the greatest film composers out there. I think he chose a good approach for this movie. It's mainly orchestral stuff, which is typical for him, but within that, he quotes the music that is iconic to the original Top Gun at key dramatic moments. So, Danger Zone and the Top Gun Anthem, which was composed by Harold Faltermeyer. After seeing the movie, I was reminded of how unusual of a composition the Top Gun Anthem is. Maybe unusual isn't the best word, but it does something really strange in the main theme. Before I talk about it, just listen to it. Okay, what's going on here? It sounds fairly simple, right? It is, for the most part. What I just played is basically how the original version goes. I might have voiced chords a little differently and embellished them in my own way, but functionally it's all the same. You probably wouldn't even catch the weird thing about it unless you were really paying attention, which is a good thing, I think. That means it was executed well. We hear the same melody 3 times. The first 2 times it ends on an unresolved note, and the third time it resolves to the tonic. But the second time we hear it, it's in a different key than the first and third times. That alone is not weird. What's weird is the key that it goes to. The music starts in the key of C, but then it modulates to G flat when the melody repeats. So from here to here. That is the most extreme of key changes. C major is at noon on the circle of fifths, and G flat is at 6 o'clock. Changing keys in a 180 around the circle of fifths like that is the furthest you can go. They're a tritone apart from each other and have basically nothing in common. If you move from one to the other, it should sound extremely disjointed. Like you're moving along, doing your thing, and then you suddenly get clotheslined. This is something I've talked about with some of my students here and there. If you're writing a song and you want to have a key change somewhere, how do you know what key to go to? For a key change to flow nicely, you might want to go to a key that's closely related to the one you're coming from. If you're coming from the key of C, then your closest options are G, F, or A minor. Why are they closely related? For a few reasons. A minor is just the relative minor to C major. They share all the same notes. G and F are both rooted a fifth away from C. G is a fifth above, F is a fifth below. And they each have 6 of 7 notes in common with the key of C. G has an F sharp in it, F has a B flat. They also each have 4 chords in common with the key of C. The circle of fifths is, of course, a very versatile reference tool. One of the many things we can use it for is to quickly identify all of the major and minor triads available to us in a given key. Taking C major, for example, the 1 chord is C major. The 4 chord is F major, 1 notch counterclockwise from C. The 5 chord is G major, 1 notch clockwise from C. The 6 chord, which is the relative minor, is on the same notch as C. The 2 chord is D minor, which is 1 notch counterclockwise from A minor. It's also the relative minor of the 4 chord. And the 3 chord is E minor, which is 1 notch clockwise from A minor. It's also the relative minor of the 5 chord. So all the major and minor triads in the key of C totally surround it on the circle in this one slice. So you can take that and rotate it around the circle to give you all the major and minor triads in any given key. So there's a lot of overlap between them. This is true of all keys that are adjacent to each other on the circle of fifths. Any two adjacent keys on the circle will have 4 triads in common with each other. Any two keys 2 notches away from each other will only have 2 triads in common. Modulating 1 notch away on the circle from wherever you are will almost inevitably sound seamless. As you travel further in either direction from where you are, the keys have less and less in common with where you're coming from until you make it to the opposite side. And this isn't just true on paper, it becomes really apparent when you actually modulate from one key to another. You can hear it in a really direct way if you play C major, then G major. Those are in the same neighborhood. Then C to D. Still playing nicely with each other. C to A. Not as much. There is no key in which these two chords coexist without some kind of chromatic alteration, but they can conceivably work together. C to E. Even further apart. C to B. Even more disjointed. And then C to G flat. Doesn't get further than that. But to be fair, you usually don't drop yourself right into a new key like that. You typically have some stepping stones. If you don't want the new key to hit you like a train, you need to make it sound like an arrival instead of a crash landing. In other words, the 1 chord in the new key needs to sound like it is the new tonic. The simplest way to tonicize it is to place a 5 chord in front of it. Like if you want G to sound like 1, make D or D7 come right before it. D is the 5 chord to G. If you want to make it even more convincing, you can put a 2 or 4 chord before the 5 chord. So A minor, C major in this case. Here's a simple way to modulate from the key of C to the key of G. Part of the reason this works so seamlessly is because C major is a chord that lives in both the key of C and the key of G. It lets us pivot into the new key. It simultaneously behaves as the 1 chord in the old key and the 4 chord in the new key. And when we reach the destination of G major, it sounds like a new place. But it didn't totally come out of nowhere, and it doesn't sound super far from where we came from. But what if I wanted to go somewhere further away, like A major? I could do it like this. So I went to D like I did before, as if I was going to G, but instead I followed it with B minor, which is the relative minor to D. B minor is the 2 chord in the key of A. E is 5, A is 1. I could have just skipped the B minor and gone straight from D to E. That would be like 4 to 5 in A, and it would still get us there, but I just think the B minor makes it all sound more colorful. An extra step, but either way, I got there smoothly. And it's generally true that the further you modulate across the circle of fifths, the more steps you need to take to make the change sound connected. Like, I went from here to here. That sounds kind of broken. A major doesn't sound like an arrival, but with all those stepping stones in between, you don't hear the disconnect as much. And yet, how is it that the Top Gun Anthem manages to modulate from C to G flat with no long setup and not sound totally wacky? Well, the melody doesn't give us any clues to this. It doesn't do anything to set up a transition, although it reinforces the key change very strongly when it comes, so we have to look at the chords to understand the transition. This is more or less what's happening. Here's the first chunk in C, here's the second chunk in G flat, and here's the third chunk that's back in C again. You might hear some of these chords differently than I do, but if there's one thing we can agree on, it's that all the chords are naturally found within their respective keys except the last ones in the first and second iterations of the melody. The only real setup we're getting for each key change is the last chord preceding the change. There's not a long string of transitional chords that you might expect from a key change as extreme as this one. Looking at the first change, we have an E flat major chord over its fifth that leads to G flat over its fifth at the start of the G flat section. That's quite a change. What's weird here is that E flat is not found in the key of C. In fact, it's quite far from the key of C. But the thing is, it's also not found in the key of G flat. So what's it doing here? That chord has nothing to do with the key we're coming from or the key we're going to, and yet it gets us there. How? Let's look at how we get back to C major from G flat. We get an A major chord over its fifth, and that goes right back to C. So once again, the transitional chord is not found in either key. What is it doing here? How is this working?
That's classified.
It's what?
It's classified. I could tell you, but then I'd have to kill you.
It does work. That's the thing. It sounds good, and it certainly doesn't confuse people who hear it. When I got the idea for this video after seeing the movie with my wife, I was telling her about how weird this key change is, and she agreed. It doesn't sound like it comes totally out of left field. To the average listener, it just sounds like an awesome 80s ballad. It's very powerful, it's very emotional, it's very dramatic, very cliche 80s screaming guitar melody. But we are musicians, and we want to understand our craft. I can only come up with one convincing explanation of how it works. I'm about to hit you with some complicated theory jargon, but don't worry, I'll break it all down for you. The question here is, how do these chords relate to the keys we're shifting between? The first transitional chord is E flat major. In C, that's a major triad on the lowered third of the key. In G flat, it's a major triad on the sixth of the key. That's what's called a chromatic mediant relationship. The term mediant, in really general terms, refers to harmonies or key centers rooted a third away from each other. A third above is a mediant, and a third below is a submediant. In the key of C, the mediant triad is E minor. It's the chord built on the third degree of the C major scale. The submediant triad is A minor. That's the sixth of the key. Those are diatonic mediants, meaning they live naturally within the key. Chromatic mediants, depending on what music theorist you ask, would be any major or minor chord a third away from C other than E minor or A minor. So that gives us A major, A flat major, A flat minor, E major, E flat major, and E flat minor. any of these could appear in certain scenarios, but let's just worry about E flat major. E flat is also one of the possible chromatic mediants in the key of G flat. So that's one level where common ground is established between the two keys, but it goes a little deeper. The third of E flat is G. When this chord is played, G is the note in the melody. The fifth is B flat. This is a note in the upcoming G flat major chord. So E flat major harmonizes with this G in the melody, which is a note in the key of C, but it also pivots us to G flat. It certainly doesn't tonicize G flat. It still makes the change sound sudden, but it does provide just enough sanding to smooth out the change and give it some dimension. This is what's called a common tone modulation. The term basically means what it sounds like. It means the key you're coming from and the key you're going to share a common note, and that common note is sustained across the change, so we hear it with the old key and then the new key. It links them together. But in this case, we have something that's more like a double common tone modulation or a pivoting common tone modulation. What I mean is a basic common tone modulation would be like going from the key of C to E flat, then continuing in E flat. But instead, the E flat major chord introduces new notes that are in the key of G flat. And then the change to G flat is a second change by common tone modulation. So the E flat chord is like a stepping stone between them. When it goes back to C from G flat, it's just the same relationship going the other way. A is the major triad on the lowered third of G flat. And it's also the major triad on the sixth of C. The same type of common tone relationship is used. The sustained note in the melody is the third of the A major chord, and the fifth introduces a note in the upcoming C major chord. And then it's just the same stuff again. So that's how it works. This is an extra dramatic way of approaching common tone modulations. The most basic way of executing one would be something like this. Here's an example going from the key of C to the key of A flat using Amazing Grace. So there, I did the whole thing in C, and then I jumped right into A flat. The note C is sustained in the melody, so it links the two keys together. C is the root in the key of C, but it's the third in the key of A flat. Those chromatic mediant common tone chords add a really interesting flavor to the Top Gun anthem. They give so much life to the key changes and make the whole thing sound huge and epic, like it should for a movie with a lot of stunts and F-18s. Chromatic mediants and common tone modulations are a big topic. I imagine I'll devote a handful of videos to them in my online chromatic harmony course that I'm planning to release sometime between now and never. It's a long way off, don't hold your breath. But in the meantime, I hope you got something out of that little breakdown. In case you missed it, I've got several open slots in my private Zoom student roster I'm looking to fill. Becoming one of my students is currently the best way to support what I do here. I also have some original exercise books available for sale on my website. These are the next best way to lend your support. Thanks for watching as always, and I'll see you in the next one.